Hey, Godfather of Anxiety here. For my latest video, I just wanted to talk about some of the common misconceptions that people have about people with anxiety disorder. There's no shortage of these misconceptions, and I'm not trying to do an all-encompassing video, but I did want to touch on some of the major ones that have affected me in my journey with anxiety spectrum conditions, and that I know have had an effect on many others out there who've been, hurt by some of these misconceptions. So, as I always preface all my videos, I'm not trying to give you a doctor's perspective. This has been my battle for the last 21 years. So I'm trying to give you a firsthand account of what I have experienced. So with that in mind, let me start with some of these misconceptions that people have. One of the really big ones is that anxiety is not a real illness. And, this is so false. And for those of you who have experienced these, some of you guys can probably attest to some of the other things that you've battled. Maybe you've been in a serious accident. Maybe you've, battled, you could have battled anything from serious, illnesses to, cancer, whatever. You could have had these, but this would give you the perspective to know exactly how debilitating anxiety can be. And it is extremely real. The neurotransmitters that are being produced, they're the fight or flight chemicals. And science isn't exactly clear on why for some people this happens. They're not. But the fact of the matter is, that's what's happening to people with anxiety disorder. That your body is dumping fight or flight chemicals, and these have real physiological symptoms and real psychological symptoms that are as real as a broken bone. So, when people say that, they're discounting things that if they were put in the same situation themselves, that very quickly would change their mind on these things. Just because you can't see things, visually see it, does not mean it's not real, especially when it comes to matters of not just the human mind, but the human body in general. If we can't see a tumor, that doesn't mean that someone doesn't have cancer. So that's kind of a ridiculous thought process when it comes to people with anxiety disorders. And, another thing that goes right along with this is that, it's all in your head. It's all in your head. That's kind of another way to say it's not a real illness. And, people saying this sometimes are well-meaning. This isn't always, somebody who's hating on you. It could be somebody who just, isn't comfortable with seeing you the way you are. And they want you to get better. But the bottom line is, if you took the same symptoms from the same neurotransmitters and you gave it to them and you said that to them, they would be really hurt by it. Because what people with these conditions, at least what I've found in my experience, they desperately don't want to have these conditions. They want to live their lives. They're intelligent people with creative minds who love and care very deeply about others. And the fact that this is happening to them is its own punishment, its own living hell, if you would. So when someone says that, this misconception that I started with here about it not being real or just being in your head is one of the most often heard, and is one of the most hurtful. So the second one is also it goes along with the first one, and it's very hurtful, and that is anxiety is a sign of weakness. Anxiety is not a sign of weakness, not at all. And I'll tell you what, you could argue about how brave of a person I am. I'd like to think that I'm not a coward, especially when it comes to, protecting those that I love or things of that nature. But any bravery that I've really shown in my life has been since I've had these anxiety spectrum conditions. Because I wasn't thinking about the things I was doing, my daily activities, providing for my family, my relationships with others, my work, how my work was going. I didn't give a second thought to this. I just did it. But since I've had these anxiety spectrum conditions, I'm trying to do those things while simultaneously being chased by a bear, while simultaneously being on a battlefield in a war. It takes such great courage when you're experiencing panic attacks, derealization, depersonalization, physical symptoms that are debilitating as well, that are, again, not as frequently talked about, but very real for those who suffer with anxiety and depression. When you're going through these things, it takes great bravery to simultaneously try to provide for your family, to try to, go to work, to try to have a good relationship with your significant other. It's not easy to do that when you're having racing thoughts that make it hard to read a sentence, or, you kind of phase all the good things out of your life when you have these conditions, because you don't do it intentionally, but it's because they steer you in that direction, because you don't want to damage all these wonderful things that you enjoy and that are precious. But when you have these anxiety conditions, they're not precious anymore. They don't feel the same. So it's anyways, getting back to it, as far as weakness goes, not weakness at all. And again, I consider some of the things I've done, some of the times that I have done things that were, probably would have been scary to do before I had an anxiety disorder. I've done some of those things since I've had anxiety disorder. And it took a lot of courage. It really did, because these symptoms are very hard to have occur, and then at the same time you're trying to be a good husband, a good father, a good, for those of you out there who are trying to be a good husband, father, wife, mother, brother, whatever. And it's extremely difficult when you're having fight or flight chemicals dumped all the time that are making you feel like you're not even real, and that just puts you in a prison, if you would. So everything that I did when I was really bad, those first 6 years, everything I did was brave. Going to work was brave. Going to the store was brave. Those things were terrifying to me at the time. I was also experiencing intrusive thought OCD. Everything, being around people you love, when your mind is having those types of thoughts, but you're doing it because you need to be there. You need to be there for your wife. You need to be there for your children. You need to be, you're not going to let your significant other go to a wedding or some other festive occasion without you, just because you're having mental health issues. But they are really debilitating, and it takes a great deal of courage to go to gatherings when you're having panic attacks, intrusive thoughts, and other physical symptoms from anxiety. So to say it's a sign of weakness is ridiculous. And as soon as somebody says that, what they're telling you is they've never had anxiety on this level. But they should be careful because in the United States, it's estimated that about 33% of the population at some point in their life will have one of these anxiety spectrum conditions. So they may hear their own words echoed back to them at some point in the future. So that's just something to give thought to. If you're somebody who doesn't have these conditions, but you're around someone who does, just remember, 1/3, roughly about the same amount of us that get cancer, will experience one of these anxiety spectrum conditions in their lifetime. Okay, my third misconception, it will go away on its own. And this is generally not the case. Are there some people out there who this has happened to? Absolutely. It can happen. But the reason why it's almost never the case is because even once the fight or flight chemicals lessen and some of the physical symptoms lessen, you will have learned thought patterns, avoidance behaviors that will make it extremely difficult. Rituals, in the case of intrusive thought OCD, that's going to make it extremely difficult to just move on with your life and to live your life in an enjoyable fashion. That's why so frequently what you're going to need, occasionally, yes, sometimes, I would say a fair amount of the time you'll need pharmaceutical intervention, you'll need medication. Some people won't. Sometimes cognitive behavioral therapy will be enough. And other times, exposure therapy. And sometimes some lifestyle changes can also help that along. But to just stay status quo and expect it to go away magically, that would be fictitious thinking. That's not likely to happen, especially once you've had it for a while and you've learned, rituals, avoidance behaviors, and just thought patterns, catastrophizing, what if thinking on steroids. Once you've developed some of these, mental habits, you have to unlearn them. It is going to take some effort. That's why I always tell you guys, medication generally is just a tool. You're going to have to put in the work. So that's the third misconception that I mentioned. The fourth one is that people with these anxiety spectrum conditions are just seeking attention. It's just a way to get attention. Well, first of all, you'd like to think there's better ways to seek attention than having chemicals dumped that are making you feel like you're either dying or going to die any second. Most of the time, people with these conditions, not most of the time, but definitely a fair amount of the time, there's people with these conditions that never say a word about them. You know what they do instead? They self-medicate. They self-medicate with alcohol. They self-medicate with drugs. They maybe even self-medicate with food. But they, especially, it's because of these stigmas and these misconceptions that we've talked about already, people don't want to admit that they're having these horrible problems. So they keep it to themselves. And unfortunately, sometimes this has led to people, attempting to take their lives because they can't deal with the feeling of being scared all the time, feeling that impending doom constantly. So not attention seeking at all. People who think this, again, it's just another sign that they lack the empathy to understand what's going on, and that's okay. Ignorance by itself is not a sin. But if you know you're being ignorant and you don't educate yourself, that's a lack of compassion and a lack of caring. And we all know that eventually, when you live like that, things are going to come back at you, right? And I'm not talking about, karma or anything like that. I'm just saying that throughout our lives, we're going to experience things, and sometimes we're on the other end of it. And it will be, a mistake if you fail to show compassion to people who are, again, experiencing something clinically very real and also extremely difficult to deal with. It would be easier if you could have a surgery. It would be easier if you could just do something like that to get rid of these anxiety spectrum conditions. But they, especially left untreated, they take on a life of their own. And they can ruin your life if you let them. It's very difficult. So people, they're not attention seeking, they're keeping it to themselves. I think men probably especially, because what man wants to go and admit he's having mental health issues? We're taught to be tough. And this just is like a confession of weakness. And this is the way a lot of men view it. But it's not. What's weakness, or not weakness, but there's nothing weak about getting help for something that's bothering you or wrong with you. You don't think it's weak when someone has a broken bone put in a cast so it will heal. Well, you might need to figuratively, put your mind and your emotions in a cast. You're going to have to put in, you might have to take medication. You also may have to, and inevitably, you're always going to have to get better from these conditions, do some therapy. You don't have to do it at the doctor's office, but in order to recover, you're going to have to do exposure therapy, and you're going to have to do cognitive behavioral therapy, or kind of rewire your mind to think more neurotypical instead of, like I always talk about in some of my videos, catastrophizing or what if thinking. And then the last one, it can be cured by a healthy lifestyle. This is the last misconception I'll talk about. And this is interesting because I always talk about in my videos about how important diet and especially sleeping and exercise, sleeping in particular, because your mind can't be healthy without sleep. But to think that just a healthy lifestyle alone will make these go away, again, completely fallacious. And I can testify to this personally because I was working out vigorously, riding my bicycle 10 miles a day, and as well as lifting weights when I first started having panic attacks. I wasn't getting sufficient sleep. That's true. And my diet could have been better. But as far as physical exercise, I was getting more than, 95% of the population at least. And, these things in and of themselves will not make anxiety spectrum conditions go away. Now, as you recover, a healthy lifestyle is a great tool to aid in recovering, especially if maybe when you develop these anxiety spectrum conditions, those things were really off, like you weren't sleeping, like in my case, I wasn't sleeping, or your diet maybe is terrible, or you're not exercising. All of those things have benefit, but just in and of themselves, they're not generally going to be a cure if you've actually developed one of the anxiety spectrum conditions. So that's about all I want to say in these videos. Again, there's a lot more misconceptions out there about people with anxiety spectrum conditions. Anytime it's your mind that's affected, it seems like human beings, because of our imperfect nature, we tend to view something as not being real if we can't see it. But for those of you out there watching the channel, you guys know how real these things are, how miserable and they can make your life, and how restrictive they can be on your ability to live and to thrive and to do the things that, we are intended to do as human beings. So I felt like it was important to make this video because all mental health conditions, are stigmatized. and have a lot of wrong views attached to them. Like some of the ones I mentioned here about either being weakness or being all in your head. And I just want the people who are tuning into the channel to know that's not true. Those are misconceptions. And I want you to know this, whether you're that person who's affected, who would already know that whether you or not you can see these things, you know, by gosh, they're real. This is real. These symptoms are real. But for those of you living with somebody who's affected with these conditions, they don't want this. Trust me on this. This is not attention seeking. They're not just trying to sit out life. They want to live, they want to thrive, but these conditions are incredibly difficult to deal with. And you know, having been through it myself, I wanted to make a video to talk about these misconceptions. And you know, if you guys have dealt with these misconceptions, don't let that beat you down. You know, anything you've done when you've had anxiety, you are brave. That has been the same, that takes the same amount of bravery as fighting off a bear or fighting in a war. It really does, because these are fight or flight chemicals, and we feel like, for those of you out there who've had panic attacks, you know you feel like you're dying. So when you're able to face life in spite of these things, you're brave. And anybody who says otherwise just hasn't experienced the conditions. So that's about where I want to end this, guys. Thanks so much for your support of the channel. It's been so great. The comments, you know, like, share, subscribe. And again, if you guys know anybody out there dealing with these things, have them take a look at the videos. Worst case scenario, they're going to realize they're not alone, and maybe there'll be an aha moment that either helps them to go work up the courage to seek treatment, or at least to realize what's going on with them. So thank you so much, and until my next video, take care.